On the morning my only daughter was supposed to walk down the aisle, my personal driver shoved me into the trunk of my own SUV and threw a heavy wool blanket over my head. I opened my mouth to shout, to demand what on earth he thought he was doing, but his calloused hand clamped firmly over my mouth. "Sir, please," he whispered, his voice tighter than I had ever heard it. "Hide in here. Do not say a single word. You need to see this. Trust me." Minutes later, what I witnessed through a tiny crack in the hatch left me completely frozen, making me realize the deadliest threat to my family was not outside the gates, but wearing a custom tuxedo in my own home. If you are a parent who has sacrificed everything to build a safe life for your children, take a deep breath. Please hit the like button and let me know down in the comments which state you are watching from, because this story will make you carefully reevaluate every person sitting at your dinner table. My name is Richard Caldwell. I am 70 years old. I spent the last 40 years building a commercial real estate and data center empire from the ground up right here in Dallas, Texas. I survived market crashes, ruthless competitors, and treacherous corporate takeovers. I built my fortune on suspicion and sharp instincts. I always believed I had seen every shade of human greed and deception. I truly thought my wealth and my relentless vigilance made my family an impenetrable fortress. I was entirely wrong. The darkness inside the trunk of my Lincoln Navigator was absolute, save for a narrow sliver of harsh Texas morning sunlight slicing through the partially unlatched tailgate. The air inside the confined space was thick, suffocating, and smelled heavily of expensive leather mixed with the faint metallic tang of motor oil. My knees ached, pressed awkwardly against my chest. Next to me in the cramped darkness was Desmond. He is a retired Marine who had been my driver confidant and head of personal security for over 15 years. Desmond was a man made of granite, a man who never showed fear. But right then, as we huddled in the dark like fugitives on my own property, I could hear his ragged, uneven breathing. I could feel the sheer tension radiating from his rigid shoulders. He kept one hand firmly pressed on my arm, a silent, desperate plea for me to remain completely still and completely quiet. We were parked in this isolated service alley of a sprawling high-tech luxury estate in the rolling hills of Austin. Inside the massive main house, dozens of caterers were frantically arranging thousands of imported white orchids. A string quartet was likely tuning their instruments in the grand hall. Upstairs in the master suite, my only daughter Victoria was getting into a custom designer wedding gown. She was preparing to marry the man she believed with all her heart was her soulmate. That man was Preston. He was 32 years old, impeccably charming, relentlessly ambitious, and recently promoted to Deputy Chief Financial Officer of my own company. I had groomed him for years. I had mentored him. I had trusted him implicitly. I had essentially handed him the keys to my corporate kingdom and the delicate heart of my only child. I stared through the tiny blinding gap in the trunk door, my vision slowly adjusting to the bright light of the gravel alley. The heavy metal door of the estate kitchens swung open with a dull thud. Footsteps crunched heavily on the loose gravel. I expected to see a delivery driver running late or a stressed catering manager. Instead, Preston stepped out into the alleyway. He was already dressed in his pristine black tuxedo, looking as though he had just stepped off the cover of a bridal magazine. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place. He casually checked his gold watch, glancing around the empty, shaded corridor, with a sharp, calculating gaze that I had never once seen him use around my daughter or myself. A moment later, another figure emerged from the side door and joined him. It was Harper. She was the elite, highly sought-after New York wedding planner that Preston had absolutely insisted we hire for this weekend. She was dressed in a sleek black pantsuit, holding a silver clipboard tightly against her chest. To my daughter, Harper had played the perfect role of the ultimate confidant, coordinating every minor detail with a warm, reassuring smile. But right now, standing in the secluded alley with my future son-in-law, there was no professional warmth. There was only a cold, predatory focus between them. I fully expected them to discuss a last-minute seating chart issue or a problem with the floral arrangements. I expected a minor crisis about the champagne delivery. but they did not speak about flowers or catering. Preston closed the distance between them swiftly. He did not look like a nervous, happy groom. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a black encrypted flash drive. He held it up between his fingers, the morning sunlight catching the sharp edge of the metal casing. He also pulled out a tiny clear glass vial filled with a colorless liquid. Harper did not reach for the items immediately. She looked at the drive, looked at the vial, and then looked up directly into Preston's eyes. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face. And then the unthinkable happened. Preston grabbed Harper by the waist, pulling her flush against his body. She dropped her clipboard to the gravel, without a second thought, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. They kissed. It was not a friendly peck on the cheek, or a momentary lapse in judgment, brought on by wedding stress. It was a passionate, greedy, sickeningly familiar embrace. It was the undeniable kiss of two people who had been sharing a bed, a life, and a very dark secret for a very long time. My stomach violently dropped. The oxygen seemed to instantly vanish from the trunk of the car. My mind raced frantically, trying to process the horrifying visual unfolding just yards away from my face. This was the man who had wept tears of joy in my study when Victoria accepted his proposal. This was the man who called me Dad, who sat in my boardroom, nodding earnestly at my every instruction. And here he was, exactly 1 hour before the sacred ceremony, devouring the wedding planner in a filthy service alley. But the infidelity was merely the surface of the nightmare. When they finally broke apart, Preston pressed the encrypted flash drive and the small glass vial firmly into Harper's hands. I strained my ears to hear their voices over the low hum of a nearby industrial generator. The words they spoke were low but crisp and clear enough to freeze the blood in my veins. "Right when she says I do the medical proxy triggers," Preston said, his voice laced with venom. "Dump that vial into the old man's champagne flute before the toast. The chemicals will react with the heart supplements I have been giving him. He will go into massive cardiac arrest in 20 minutes. Natural causes. Clean. Untraceable. The biometric override is already loaded on that drive. The second his heart stops, you run the sweep. Sweep all $80 million from his blind trust straight to the Cayman accounts." Harper smiled, slipping the vial and the drive into her pocket. "When this is done," she whispered, "we will never have to look at his arrogant face or deal with his pathetic, needy daughter ever again." I did not scream. I did not violently kick open the trunk to confront them. The initial blinding wave of paternal rage instantly crystallized into a thick layer of solid, absolute ice. My survival instincts, honed by decades of ruthless corporate warfare, took over my body. I realized in that suffocating darkness that the extravagant wedding I was paying for was not a celebration of love. It was a meticulously crafted digital Trojan horse. It was an execution chamber designed specifically for me. Every strange occurrence over the past few months suddenly aligned in my head with terrifying clarity. The sudden change of venue to an isolated estate, the firing of my personal doctor, the new software integrations Harper had insisted upon. They were not planning a life together. They were planning a massive heist, and they were planning to eliminate the only obstacle in their way. Me. I looked at Desmond in the dark. He nodded slowly. We were at war, and my daughter was walking straight into the arms of a murderer. As their lips finally parted, the heavy gravel crunched beneath Preston's polished leather shoes. He took a calculated step closer to Harper. Inside the trunk, Desmond shifted his weight slightly, ensuring his body shielded me from any sudden movement of the vehicle. My breathing was shallow. Every inhale felt like drawing crushed glass into my lungs. I pressed my ear closer to the narrow opening of the tailgate. I needed to hear every single syllable. The ambient noise of the estate, the distant hum of the catering trucks, and the faint rustle of the Texas wind in the oak trees seemed to fade away entirely. There was only the sound of my future son-in-law planning the end of my life. Preston leaned against the brick wall of the service alley. He looked down at the encrypted flash drive in Harper's hand. The biometric override triggers the exact second the digital marriage license is signed, he said. His voice was casual, almost bored, as if he were discussing a routine corporate merger rather than a massive theft. I spent 6 months mapping his digital signature and accessing the back end of the Caldwell firm servers. The moment the officiant hits submit on that tablet, the digital proxy protocol opens the gate. That transfers the entire $150 million from the old man's blind trust straight through the shell companies and directly into the Cayman account. It will happen in less than 4 seconds. He will not even have time to blink before his entire empire belongs to us. I stared through the crack, my vision blurring at the edges. $150 million. It was not just money. It was 40 years of my blood, my sweat, and my relentless sacrifice. It was the legacy I had built from a single rented warehouse in South Dallas to a nationwide logistics and real estate powerhouse. I had missed Victoria's childhood piano recitals to close the deals that built that trust. I had sacrificed my youth to ensure my family would never know the sting of poverty. And this arrogant, tailored parasite was going to sweep it all away with a stolen digital thumbprint and a fake smile. Harper traced the edge of the glass vial with her perfectly manicured thumbnail. She looked up at him, a dark, thrilled expression dancing across her features. And the toast she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Are you absolutely certain the timing will work? I do not want him collapsing in the middle of the vows. It would ruin the aesthetic of the live stream." Preston chuckled. It was a low, genuinely amused sound that made my stomach violently churn. I had heard that exact chuckle when he played golf with me at the country club, when he asked for my daughter's hand in marriage, when he sat at my dinner table eating the food my money provided. "Do not worry about the aesthetic," Preston smirked. "The timing is flawless. The champagne will be served exactly 10 minutes after the ceremony concludes. I specifically ordered the Paul Roger vintage because of its high acidity and alcohol profile. When that specific champagne reacts with the daily supplements he has been taking for the past 2 months, it creates an immediate catastrophic chemical cascade." He paused, adjusting his silk tie with a sickeningly calm demeanor. "I have been feeding him that compound every single morning under the guise of holistic health. It has been slowly weakening his arterial walls. He already thinks he is just getting old and tired. When the alcohol hits his bloodstream, he will experience massive heart failure in exactly 20 minutes. Natural causes. It will be completely clean and totally untraceable. By the time the paramedics arrive at this secluded estate, it will be far too late. He will be dead. We will be married, and the money will be gone." The words hung in the warm morning air, heavy and lethal. Heart failure in 20 minutes. Natural causes. Clean and untraceable. I felt a sudden phantom ache in my left arm. For the past 2 months, I had been experiencing strange bouts of dizziness. I had felt uncharacteristic fatigue and occasional numbness in my extremities. I had attributed it to the stress of the upcoming wedding, the natural decline of a 70-year-old body, and the relentless pressure of running a massive corporation. I had trusted Preston. When he fired my longtime personal physician claiming the man was outdated and negligent, I believed him. When he brought in his own specialist and handed me those specialized vitamin capsules every morning, with a warm, caring smile, I swallowed them without a second thought. I had literally been swallowing my own death sentence hand-delivered by the man I welcomed into my home. Beside me in the dark trunk, Desmond let out a slow, silent breath through his nose. His massive hand tightened around my forearm. It was an iron grip anchoring me to reality, preventing me from doing something foolish like throwing the trunk open and strangling Preston with my bare hands. Desmond had served in combat zones. He knew the look of a man who was about to snap. I turned my head slightly in the dark and met Desmond's eyes. I did not need to speak. My fury was a tangible, burning presence in the confined space. Through the narrow gap, I watched Harper slip the glass vial into the sleek pocket of her blazer. She looked at Preston with a mixture of greed and twisted adoration. "You really are a genius, you know," that she murmured, stepping close to him again. "Victoria has absolutely no idea. The poor naive little princess actually thinks you love her." Preston scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Victoria is a means to an end. She is spoiled, exhausting, and desperate for affection. All I had to do was play the devoted listener, agree with her complaints about her overbearing father, and she handed me the keys to the castle. Once the money clears and the old man is buried, I will tolerate her for a few months to keep up appearances. Then I will file for a quiet divorce, take my half of the marital assets, and leave her with nothing but a broken heart and an empty bank account. We will be sipping cocktails on a beach in St. Bart's by Christmas, Harper. I promise you." The absolute cruelty of his words struck me harder than the revelation of my impending murder. He was not just planning to kill me and steal my fortune. He was actively mocking the pure, genuine love my daughter had for him. Victoria was not perfect. She was headstrong and often clashed with me over my demanding nature, but she possessed a deeply tender heart. She had defended Preston to me on numerous occasions, insisting that I was too cynical, too suspicious of outsiders. She had begged me to accept him, to see the good in him, and he viewed her as nothing more than a pathetic, disposable stepping stone. I felt a cold, terrifying calmness wash over my entire being. I did not move a single muscle as the crunch of their footsteps faded down the gravel alleyway. I waited in the suffocating darkness, listening to the distant hum of the catering trucks and the heavy beating of my own heart. I did not scream. I did not kick the trunk open in a fit of blind rage. The initial shock that had paralyzed me moments ago was gone entirely, replaced by the ruthless, calculating instinct that had allowed me to crush Wall Street adversaries for 40 years. When you realize you are in a cage with a predator, panic is a death sentence. You do not make a sound until you are holding a loaded weapon. Beside me, Desmond remained perfectly still until the heavy metal door of the estate kitchen clicked shut. Only then did he release his iron grip on my arm. He reached up and pressed the internal release latch. The heavy trunk door swung open, flooding our cramped space with the blinding morning sun. I slowly climbed out of the vehicle, my joints aching from the awkward position my expensive tuxedo rumpled. I stood on the gravel and brushed off my jacket. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked at Desmond. The retired Marine stood at attention, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like carved stone. He had known, or at least suspected, the depth of this betrayal, and he had risked his own job to show me the truth. "I owe you my life, Desmond," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of absolute authority. He nodded once, a sharp and professional gesture. "We have a severe security breach, sir," he replied softly. "I need to get you off this property right now." I shook my head. "No," I told him, looking up at the sprawling, majestic estate that was supposed to host the happiest day of my daughter's life. "If I disappear now, Preston will know his plan has been compromised. He will vanish with Harper, and he will find another way to take my money and my life. More importantly, if I stop this wedding right this second, without undeniable public proof, Victoria will never forgive me. She is completely under his spell. She would believe any lie he spun to explain away his sudden departure. I cannot just save my life. I have to completely dismantle his illusion." I looked around the pristine grounds, the manicured hedges, and the elegant white tents being erected in the distance. The $500,000 wedding I was paying for was not a celebration of love. It was a highly orchestrated execution chamber. Every detail, from the isolated location to the specific brand of champagne, had been chosen to facilitate my murder. I turned to Desmond, my mind operating at terrifying speed. "I need you to lock down my perimeter immediately," I instructed. "You are my shadow for the rest of the day. Do not eat or drink anything provided by the catering staff. Do not let any unauthorized personnel near my quarters. And most importantly, you must not show an ounce of hostility toward Preston. We are going to smile, we are going to shake his hand, and we are going to play our parts flawlessly. Desmond adjusted his suit jacket, his eyes scanning the alleyway for any hidden cameras or eavesdroppers. "What about the chemical compound, sir?" he asked. "He plans poisoning your toast." I felt a cold smile tug at the corner of my mouth. "We are going to let him try," I said. "But before we get to the reception, I need to secure my assets and neutralize his biological weapon." I reached into my pocket, pulling out my secure corporate device. It was time to initiate a silent war. I had built my empire by anticipating the movements of my enemies. Preston thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess, assuming I was nothing more than a wealthy, oblivious pawn. He had severely underestimated the man he was trying to kill. I took a deep breath of the warm Texas air, pushing aside the profound sorrow of seeing my daughter being so cruelly manipulated. There would be time to mourn the death of her innocence later. Right now, I had to save her future. I instructed Desmond to return to his post near the front gates and act as if nothing had happened. I walked back toward the main entrance of the estate, pasting a gentle, oblivious smile onto my face. I nodded at the florists carrying massive bouquets of white roses. I greeted the wedding coordinator assistants, who were rushing past me with clipboards. Internally, I was assembling a meticulous timeline. I had to reverse engineer every single decision Preston had made over the past few months. I had to dissect his flawless lies and locate the digital tripwires he had buried in my life. As I walked through the grand foyer surrounded by the opulence of my own wealth, I realized how easily I had been led to the slaughter. I had willingly walked into this trap because I wanted my daughter to be happy. I had allowed my paternal blind spots to override my business acumen, but that vulnerability was gone now. The father had stepped aside. The chief executive had taken the wheel. I was going to let Preston walk to the altar. I was going to let him believe he had won. And then I was going to tear his entire world apart. To ensure I did not tip my hand prematurely, I made my way toward the groom's staging area. I needed to look him in the eye and deliver an Academy Award-winning performance. I found Preston standing in front of a gilded mirror, adjusting his bow tie. He looked calm, radiant, and utterly ruthless beneath his polished veneer. "Preston! My boy!" I called out warmly, stepping into the room. He turned his face, instantly breaking into a bright, affectionate smile that made my stomach churn. "Gregory," he said, stepping forward to shake my hand. "I am so glad you are here. How are you feeling this morning?" I forced my hand to remain steady. "I feel wonderful, Preston," I replied, letting my voice tremble a fraction, playing the part of the aging patriarch. "I wanted to come by and thank you. You have made Victoria incredibly happy. I could not ask for a better man to join our family today." Preston placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. His touch felt like venom seeping through my jacket. "It is an honor, sir," he said earnestly. "I promise you I will take care of her and your legacy for the rest of my life." I smiled back, looking deep into his lying eyes. "I know you will, Preston," I said softly. "I know exactly what you are going to do today." I patted his arm and left the room. Every step away from him solidified my resolve. The chessboard was set. He made his opening move in the dark, but the final checkmate would belong to me in the blinding light of day. I walked down the sweeping mahogany staircase of the Austin estate, my mind drifting back to exactly how we ended up in this beautifully gilded cage. 4 months ago, none of this was the plan. We were originally scheduled to host the wedding at a historic, heavily secured hotel in downtown Dallas. It was a classic, sophisticated location, where my corporate security team had absolute home court advantage. But Preston had meticulously orchestrated a change of scenery, laying the groundwork for his trap with the precision of a master manipulator. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in November. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly logistics reports when Victoria and Preston walked in. Victoria looked completely radiant, clutching a glossy promotional brochure against her chest, while Preston trailed half a step behind her. He wore that same earnest, respectful expression I had just seen upstairs. He placed his hand gently on the small of her back, playing the picture of a devoted, protective partner. Victoria bounced over to my desk and dropped the heavy brochure right on top of my financial spreadsheets. "Dad, we found it," she said, her eyes shining with absolute excitement. The perfect place. It advertised a sprawling, ultra-modern luxury compound, hidden deep in the Texas Hill Country, just outside of Austin. It boasted of off-grid capabilities, smart home integration, and total seclusion. I frowned, adjusting my reading glasses. "What is wrong with the hotel in Dallas?" I asked. "We have already placed a substantial deposit, and it is 10 minutes from the corporate headquarters. It is highly convenient for our security teams and the board members." Preston stepped forward, resting his palms respectfully on the edge of my desk. He leaned in, lowering his voice to that perfect, reasonable timbre he always used when pitching a new corporate acquisition to the board. "Gregory, the hotel is a beautiful venue." He began, his tone dripping with fake deference. "But it is a logistical nightmare for our privacy. It is right in the middle of the city. We have 3 different paparazzi outlets already trying to bribe the hotel staff for the guest list. You know how aggressive they can be regarding your personal life and Victoria's movements. I simply cannot allow her special day to be turned into a media circus." I looked at Victoria. Her joyful smile had faltered slightly, replaced by a subtle look of anxiety. Preston knew exactly how to play on her deep hatred of the tabloids, a hatred born from years of growing up in the exhausting shadow of my wealth. This estate in Austin, Preston continued tapping the glossy brochure, is a fortress. It sits on 200 acres of private land. It has a single, easily controlled access road. But more importantly, Gregory, it has a closed-loop internal digital network. It is entirely severed from the public grid. That means absolute cybersecurity for you and our high-profile guests. No one can hack the wireless system. No one can leak photographs. It will keep you and the family completely private. It was a flawless, brilliant argument. He appealed directly to my most ingrained instinct, the relentless need to protect my daughter and my digital data. I prided myself on security. I spent tens of millions of dollars every single year safeguarding my corporate assets from digital espionage. Preston knew my psychological vulnerabilities perfectly. He spoke my specific language. He framed a deadly, calculated trap as a state-of-the-art shield. "A closed-loop network," I repeated, mulling over the concept. "And you have thoroughly vetted their security infrastructure." Personally, Preston lied without breaking my gaze. "I had our internal tech team run a preliminary diagnostic. It is completely airtight, sir. Victoria will have the fairy tale wedding she deserves, and you will have absolute peace of mind." I looked back at my daughter. She was glowing again, eagerly anticipating my approval. I had spent my entire life denying her normal experiences because of the heavy constraints of our immense wealth. I desperately wanted to give her this one perfect, untainted day. I sighed, taking off my glasses and tossing them onto the wooden desk. "Fine," I said. "If the security checks out, we will move the venue to Austin. But I want our people running the perimeter." Preston smiled, a bright, triumphant flash of perfect white teeth. "Of course, Gregory. I will personally coordinate with your security director to ensure a seamless transition." As I walked through the busy corridors of that very estate 4 months later, the chilling brilliance of his strategy loudly echoed in my mind. The move to Austin had absolutely nothing to do with paparazzi or Victoria's comfort. It was a calculated, necessary step for his assassination and embezzlement plot. By moving us to an isolated location, he physically separated me from my primary medical staff and my core security apparatus. The Dallas Hotel was exactly 3 blocks from a premier trauma center. This estate was 45 minutes away from the nearest hospital via winding, narrow rural roads. A 20-minute window for heart failure was a guaranteed death sentence out here. But the most sinister part of his lie was the closed-loop network. He did not want a closed network to keep hackers out. He wanted a closed network to lock me in. By isolating the estate's servers from the public grid, he ensured that my personal corporate devices would be forced to connect to the internal network, a network that he and his criminal wife Harper would completely and totally control. It was the only possible way they could intercept the biometric proxy without my corporate security algorithms flagging the massive offshore transfer. They desperately needed a digital vacuum to execute a $150 million theft completely invisibly. Every caterer walking past me, every beautiful floral arrangement hanging from the vaulted ceilings was paid for by the very man they were actively preparing to murder. Preston had used my own money to construct my tomb. He had weaponized my deep love for Victoria, twisting my fundamental desire to protect her into the exact mechanism of my downfall. He had played the devoted, caring protector so flawlessly that I had practically thanked him for digging my grave. I paused near a large arched window looking out over the sprawling green lawns of the estate. The morning sun warmed the landscape, casting long shadows over the manicured grass. It looked like paradise. It felt like a nightmare. I watched two valet attendants parking the luxury vehicles of my arriving guests. My closest friends, my business partners, and my family members were unknowingly walking into a crime scene. Preston had orchestrated a masterpiece of deception. He had isolated me geographically, compromised me medically, and trapped me digitally. He believed he had won. He believed I was just a clueless old man waiting to die after paying the bill. But I was not a victim. I was the architect of my own empire, and I was about to totally dismantle his. To fully comprehend the sheer depth of Preston's malice, I had to look back at how systematically he had dismantled my defenses. The venue change was merely his way of securing the perimeter. His next objective was much more intimate. He needed to compromise my biology. It started exactly 2 months ago during a routine Sunday dinner at my estate in Dallas. I had been experiencing a very mild, almost imperceptible tremor in my left hand. It was nothing more than a minor neurological flutter, a harmless byproduct of age and decades of high-stress executive decision-making. My longtime personal physician, Dr. Linwood, had managed my health perfectly for nearly 30 years. He assured me the tremor was benign, prescribing basic rest and a standard blood pressure medication. But Preston saw that tiny flutter not as a symptom of age, but as a golden window of opportunity. That Sunday, as I struggled slightly to pour a glass of Cabernet, Preston was immediately by my side. He gently took the bottle from my shaking hand, his face etched with deep manufactured concern. Victoria watched from the other side of the dining table, her eyes wide with sudden worry. Preston did not make a scene, but he planted the seed of doubt with absolute precision. He leaned in and whispered that we needed to take my health much more seriously, especially with the wedding approaching so rapidly. Within 48 hours of that dinner, Preston had initiated his medical coup. He sat down with Victoria and convinced her that Dr. Linwood was dangerously outdated. He pulled up fabricated statistics and obscure medical journals on his tablet, arguing that older physicians often dismissed early warning signs of severe neurological decline. He terrified my daughter. He made her believe that if we did not take drastic, immediate action, I might not even be able to walk her down the aisle. Victoria, driven by sheer panic and profound love for me, begged me to listen to her fiancé. I loved my daughter too much to bear the sight of her tears, so I yielded to her relentless pleading. I allowed Preston to take the reins regarding my medical care. He personally called Dr. Linwood and dismissed him. I still remember the sound of Preston's voice echoing from the hallway as he made that phone call. It was crisp, authoritative, and utterly devoid of empathy. He told a man who had saved my life during a severe bout of pneumonia a decade ago that his services were no longer required, effective immediately. By severing my tie to Dr. Linwood, Preston removed the only medical professional who knew my baseline health intimately. He blinded my defenses, clearing the path for his own carefully selected operative to enter my home and begin administering the very chemical compound that was designed to silently end my life. The very next morning, Preston introduced his replacement. He brought a man named Dr. Arrington directly to my corporate office. Arrington did not look like a traditional cardiologist or neurologist. He wore a sharp, tailored suit instead of a medical coat, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Preston introduced him as a premier holistic specialist, a concierge physician who catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals looking for cutting-edge preventative optimization. Arrington spoke in smooth, comforting tones. He used buzzwords like cellular regeneration, biohacking, and holistic longevity. He performed a brief, entirely superficial examination of my hands, took my blood pressure, and confidently declared that traditional medicine was failing me. He promised that within a few weeks, his customized regimen would eliminate the tremors entirely and restore the vitality of my youth. Looking back from the dark reality of this wedding day, I realized Arrington was likely not a doctor at all. He was simply another highly paid actor in Preston's lethal theater brought in to legitimize the poison. Arrington opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 heavy dark amber glass bottles. He set them on my mahogany desk with a dramatic, reassuring nod. "These are proprietary cellular supplements," Arrington explained smoothly, holding up one of the heavy glass bottles. "They are compounded specifically for your neurological profile. You will take 2 capsules every single morning with your coffee. Do not skip a dose. It is absolutely crucial for the chemical compound to build up correctly in your system." I looked at the dark bottles resting on my desk, feeling a faint, irrational prickle of hesitation. I was a man who scrutinized multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate contracts down to the final comma, yet I was about to ingest an entirely unknown substance simply because my future son-in-law had recommended it. Sensing my hesitation, Preston stepped forward, bridging the physical gap between us. He placed his hand directly over mine, his grip feeling firm and undeniably warm. He looked at me with an expression of such profound, carefully manufactured devotion that it completely bypassed my usual rigid skepticism. "I just want you at 100% for the father-daughter dance, sir," Preston said softly, his voice thick with a perfectly calibrated layer of emotion. He looked deep into my eyes effortlessly, playing the role of the caring, fiercely protective son to absolute perfection. These supplements worked absolute miracles for my own father when his physical health started to decline a few years ago. I want Victoria to look back on our wedding day and remember exactly how strong and vibrant you looked holding her hand. Please, Gregory, do this for her. Do this for us. His soft, calculated words were an absolute masterclass in severe psychological manipulation. By invoking his own father and leveraging my overwhelming love for Victoria, he completely neutralized my defensive instincts. He made the act of taking an unknown pill feel like a grand gesture of paternal sacrifice. I nodded, thanking him for his diligence, and promised I would follow the strict daily regimen without fail. From that day forward, those dark amber bottles sat prominently on my kitchen counter. Every single morning, Victoria would joyfully watch me swallow the 2 large capsules with my black coffee. She would smile brightly, completely unaware that she was actively supervising my systematic poisoning. Preston had managed to weaponize my daughter's love against me using her innocence to guarantee my compliance. He knew that I would never question a routine that made her feel safe and secure. It was a level of emotional cruelty that defied basic human comprehension. The lethal blueprint was absolutely flawless. The secluded venue trapped me physically, the digital firewall trapped my wealth, and the daily supplements trapped my failing biology. He had quietly woven a noose around my neck, using the delicate threads of family trust. Now, as the morning sun beat down on the gravel of the service alley, the full horrifying picture was finally clear. The trap had been meticulously set, and the executioner was patiently waiting at the altar. But Preston had made one catastrophic miscalculation in his grand murderous design. He forgot that a seasoned wolf who has ruthlessly survived the brutal corporate wilderness for 70 long years simply never forgets exactly how to hunt down its prey. To understand how Preston planned to siphon $150 million out of a highly secured blind trust, I had to trace his steps back to the ultimate Trojan horse. He could not bypass my corporate firewalls from the outside. The digital security I employed was virtually impenetrable to external threats. He needed someone on the inside, someone with administrative clearance, someone who could walk right through the front door and plant the virus directly into the mainframe. That someone was Harper, the elite New York event coordinator. It happened exactly 1 month ago in the penthouse boardroom of the Caldwell Building in downtown Dallas. Victoria had been stressing over the mounting logistical nightmares of the Austin estate. The vendor list was expanding rapidly, the catering contracts were highly complex, and the floral arrangements required international shipping logistics. Preston, playing the role of the ultimate problem solver, suggested we bring in elite reinforcements. He told us he had pulled a massive favor with a contact in New York to secure the services of Harper, billing her as the most exclusive event coordinator on the entire East Coast. When she walked into my boardroom that Tuesday morning, she looked the part flawlessly. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal pantsuit, carrying a sleek leather portfolio, radiating an aura of absolute ruthless competence. Victoria was instantly mesmerized by her confidence. Harper spoke with rapid-fire precision, identifying logistical bottlenecks and offering brilliant, immediate solutions. She charmed my daughter, complimented my office view, and presented herself as the ultimate luxury wedding savior. I was impressed. I am a man who respects extreme competence, and Harper played the part of the high-powered executive coordinator to absolute perfection. After spending an hour effortlessly resolving Victoria's seating chart anxieties, Harper turned her sharp, calculating gaze directly to me. She opened her leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of vendor contracts across the polished mahogany table. Mr. Caldwell, she began, her tone shifting from warm wedding planner to serious financial strategist. The scope of this event is massive. We are dealing with over 40 independent contractors, international shipping tariffs, and significant local tax liabilities. Handling these invoices individually through your personal accounts will be a monumental headache for your personal assistants. It is highly inefficient. I leaned back in my leather chair, intrigued by her sudden shift to corporate logistics. What exactly do you suggest we do, Harper? I asked. She smiled, a crisp, professional, completely fraudulent smile. I use a proprietary event management software designed specifically for ultra-high net worth clients, she explained smoothly. If we link my vendor payment system directly into your master corporate accounts, I can automate the entire financial backend of the wedding. It will instantly categorize every single expense, process the international wire transfers automatically, and format the data perfectly for your chief financial officer. It will save your accounting team hours of manual labor, Mr. Caldwell. It will greatly streamline the tax write-offs and entirely eliminate any potential clerical errors. It sounded like music to a chief executive's ears. Efficiency, automation, and tax optimization. Preston sat next to her, nodding in earnest agreement, playing the role perfectly. I can personally oversee the entire software integration with our dedicated IT department, he added smoothly. It will keep your personal assistants free to focus on your actual business operations, instead of chasing down invoices for imported orchids. I looked at the two of them, completely blind to the lethal synchronization of their pitch. I saw a brilliant event coordinator and a fiscally responsible future son-in-law trying to save my company time and resources. I did not see the executioner and the thief. I picked up my gold fountain pen and signed the authorization forms without a single second of hesitation. Within 48 hours, Preston had personally walked my IT director through the software integration. Harper's proprietary wedding management system was given direct administrative access to the deepest lower levels of my corporate financial network. I had literally unbolted the heavy steel doors of my empire and invited the predators inside, offering them a comfortable seat at the table. Standing in the grand hallway of the Austin estate, the memory of that boardroom meeting burned in my mind like battery acid. The software was not designed to pay florists or caterers. It was a digital parasite, a silent, invisible tunnel dug directly underneath the vault of my blind trust. For an entire month, that software had been quietly mapping the internal pathways of my wealth, bypassing firewalls from the inside, waiting patiently for the final command. The encrypted flash drive Preston had just handed to Harper in the filthy service alley was the detonator. The biometric override he mentioned was my digital signature, the absolute final authorization needed to initiate the massive transfer. The second the officiant submitted the digital marriage license, Harper would insert that drive into her tablet. The software would register the marriage, activate the biometric override, and drain $150 million from the massive corporate reserves, sending it untraceably to offshore accounts in the Caymans. And 20 minutes later, the poisoned champagne would ensure I could never launch a formal corporate investigation. I walked into the opulent grand ballroom, where the reception was scheduled to take place. The massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, elegant glow over the meticulously arranged tables. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the centerpieces, filling the room with a heavy, sweet fragrance. It was a breathtaking display of wealth, a perfect illusion masking a deeply sinister reality. I stopped at the head table, staring at the delicate crystal-clear champagne flute, resting perfectly at my assigned seat. In just a few hours, Harper planned to pour my certain death into that glass. I pulled my secure mobile device from my breast pocket. The anger in my veins had completely solidified into a cold, absolute focus. I did not need to scream. I did not need to confront them and demand foolish explanations. That was the reaction of a weak man, a man who allowed his emotions to dictate his strategy. I was Richard Caldwell. I destroyed competitors for a living. I dismantled hostile takeovers before breakfast. Preston and Harper thought they were executing a flawless heist, but they had simply handed me the exact tools I needed to orchestrate their absolute, undeniable ruin. I dialed the direct number for my chief security architect in Dallas, a man who answered to no one but me. He picked up on the first ring. I gave him a series of rapid, highly specific commands. I instructed him to completely isolate the wedding management software, build a shadow network around the Cayman routing protocols, and prepare to freeze every single digital asset associated with Preston's name. I did not sever the connection. I let the Trojan horse remain inside the gates, but I quietly changed the locks on the vault. When Harper attempted to trigger the transfer, she would not steal my fortune. She would inadvertently dump the entire sum into a secure holding account fully controlled by our federal investigators. I hung up the phone and looked back at the crystal-clear champagne flute. The financial trap was neutralized, but the biological threat remained active. I needed to handle the poison, and I needed to do it in a way that exposed Preston in front of the entire assembly. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, my steps measured and completely silent on the thick carpet. The grand wedding was about to begin, and I was fully prepared to play the role of the loving, unsuspecting father right up until the exact moment I entirely shattered their lives forever. I walked out of the ballroom, my steps measured and completely silent on the thick carpet. The grand wedding was about to begin, and I was fully prepared to play the role of the loving, unsuspecting father right up until the exact moment I entirely shattered their lives forever. But my survival today was not merely the result of overhearing their filthy conversation in the alleyway. To reach this point of absolute tactical clarity, my own body had to sound the alarm. The true awakening happened exactly 3 weeks ago, long before we ever set foot on this isolated Austin estate. It was a subtle, terrifying physical glitch that forced my deeply buried survivor instincts to claw their way back to the surface. It was late on a Thursday evening in my Dallas home. The house was completely quiet save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in my study. I had been diligently following Preston's holistic medical regimen for over a month. Every single morning, under the watchful, adoring eyes of my daughter, I swallowed the 2 dark amber capsules Dr. Arrington had prescribed. Preston had been incredibly attentive, frequently asking how my hands felt, asking if my energy levels were stable, and making sure my schedule remained completely free of unnecessary stress. I believed I was being cared for by a fiercely loyal future son-in-law. I poured myself a generous glass of aged single malt scotch, a long-standing evening tradition of mine. Preston was very much aware of this habit. He had even gifted me the specific bottle I was drinking from, praising its complex flavor profile. I sat back in my heavy leather armchair, took a long, slow sip of the amber liquid, and opened a financial dossier. I did not even make it to the second page. Less than 5 minutes after the alcohol entered my bloodstream, a sudden blinding wave of nausea washed over me. It was not a gentle discomfort. It felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly vacuumed out of the large room. I gasped, dropping the heavy dossier onto the floor. Then the pain hit. It was a terrifying, crushing agony radiating from the dead center of my chest. It felt like a massive iron anvil had been dropped directly onto my ribcage. My vision narrowed into a dark, pulsing tunnel. I tried to stand up to call for Desmond or reach the phone on my desk, but my legs completely buckled beneath me. I collapsed hard onto my hands and knees, my fingers clawing helplessly at the thick Persian rug. The crystal glass slipped from my grip, shattering into dozens of sharp pieces against the hardwood floor. The scotch pooled around my trembling hands. Every single heartbeat felt like a jagged knife dragging across my lungs. I could not draw a full breath. I was suffocating in my own study alone, convinced I was experiencing a massive, fatal heart attack. I waited for the final dark curtain to fall. I waited for my body to give out completely. But then something miraculous and highly unnatural happened. Exactly 3 minutes after the crushing pain began, it vanished. It did not slowly fade away. It receded instantly, leaving me gasping for air. In a pool of cold sweat, my heart hammering a frantic but steady rhythm against my ribs. I remained on the floor for a long time, my chest heaving, staring at the shattered glass and the spilled liquor. My mind, honed by decades of corporate warfare, immediately began running diagnostics on the event. A natural heart attack does not simply turn off like a light switch. A natural cardiac event leaves lingering, undeniable damage. This was a severe, violent chemical reaction. My instincts, the same instincts that had protected me from ruthless predators on Wall Street, suddenly flared with blinding intensity. I had not changed my diet. I had not changed my exercise routine. I had not changed my evening scotch. The only new variable in my entire biological ecosystem was the holistic supplement Preston and his unvetted doctor had insisted I take. I slowly pulled myself up from the floor, my hands shaking, but not from the neurological tremor. They were shaking with the adrenaline of a man who had just sidestepped a hidden landmine. I walked over to the kitchen and stared at the dark amber bottles resting innocently next to the coffee maker. I realized in that quiet, chilling moment that Preston was incredibly interested in my evening scotch routine. He had asked me casually a week prior if I was still enjoying a nightly drink to wind down. He had been probing for data. He had been testing the chemical timeline. The capsules were not curing my minor tremors. They were meticulously saturating my cellular walls, waiting for a catalyst to trigger a catastrophic cardiac failure. The scotch had been a minor premature catalyst. A full glass of highly acidic wedding champagne would be the main event. I did not rush to the hospital. I did not call the police or alert my daughter. If I raised an alarm without concrete proof, Preston would deny everything. He would claim the supplements were completely benign and suggest my mind was failing. He would use the medical episode to declare me unfit, accelerating his control over my empire. I had to handle this with absolute lethal discretion. I grabbed the amber bottles from the counter. I opened them, walked to the sink, and poured the contents out. The dark powder vanished down the drain. I meticulously washed the residue away. From that night onward, my morning routine became a highly calculated performance. Every day at breakfast, I would take the 2 empty capsules I had carefully reassembled and filled with harmless baking soda. I would swallow them right in front of Victoria and Preston, washing them down with my coffee, smiling warmly at their apparent concern for my health. I engaged in a profound daily act of deception, but simply stopping the poison was not enough. To maintain the illusion and feed Preston's growing arrogance, I had to convince him his sinister plan was working flawlessly. I began to simulate a slow, steady physical decline. During corporate meetings, I would intentionally let my hand tremble violently when holding a pen. I would rub my chest occasionally, feigning minor discomfort. I would complain about being unusually tired, excusing myself early from family dinners. The twisted satisfaction of watching Preston react to my fake symptoms was deeply sickening. Whenever my hand shook, I could see a brief, triumphant gleam in his dark eyes before he masked it with a look of extreme concern. He would rush to my side, offering me a glass of water, gently reminding me to take things easy. He played the deeply worried son perfectly, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actively studying his every move. I was watching him construct my murder step by step, and I was memorizing the entire blueprint. He believed he had successfully weakened the lion. He had no idea the lion was merely crouching in the tall grass, waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect moment to gather undeniable evidence arrived just 3 days before the wedding ceremony. We drove down to the sprawling Austin compound for a final venue walkthrough. Victoria was practically vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat of the luxury vehicle, chattering endlessly about floral arrangements and lighting schedules. Preston sat beside her, holding her hand, nodding attentively at her every word. I sat in the front passenger seat, staring out the window at the rolling Texas hill country, playing the quiet, fatigued patriarch. My fake tremors had become a regular feature of my daily performance. I let my left hand rattle slightly against my knee as the vehicle navigated the long, winding driveway toward the main house. Preston noticed, of course. He always noticed. He leaned forward and offered a deeply sympathetic smile, assuring me that the clean country air and the holistic supplements would have me feeling robust by the weekend. I thanked him, my voice sufficiently weak while my mind analyzed the tactical layout of the estate we were approaching. The perimeter was indeed secure. High stone walls, a single entry point with heavy iron gates and dense woodland surrounding the property. It was a beautiful, isolated fortress. As we parked in front of the grand foyer, Harper greeted us with her signature clipboard and a sharp, professional smile. She immediately took Victoria and Preston on a tour of the ballroom, leaving me to wander the main level under the pretense of admiring the architecture. In reality, I was testing my communication lines. I pulled my secure corporate smartphone from my jacket pocket. This device was encrypted utilizing a private satellite relay network that cost my company thousands of dollars a month to maintain. It was designed to have a signal in the middle of the ocean or deep underground. Yet as I stood in the vast sunlit atrium of the Austin estate, the screen showed absolutely 0 bars. No service. No network connection. The closed-loop internal network that Preston had pitched as a privacy feature was actually operating an aggressive localized signal jammer. It was blocking all outbound communication that did not route directly through their corrupted server. They were completely cutting off my digital oxygen. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from the stark realization of their sheer audacity. They were going to murder me and simultaneously steal my empire, ensuring I could not send a single desperate message or trigger a corporate alarm before my heart stopped beating. I slipped the dead phone back into my pocket and walked toward the courtyard, needing to observe Preston closely. I found him standing near the edge of the manicured lawn a few yards away from Victoria and Harper, who were debating the placement of the string quartet. Preston thought he was unobserved. He was standing with his back to the main house, looking out over the oak trees. I watched him reach into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and extract a small, cheap, disposable burner phone. A man who owned 3 different high-end corporate devices had absolutely no legitimate reason to carry an untraceable piece of plastic. I stood perfectly still behind a large stone pillar. The estate was supposedly a complete digital dead zone, a black hole for cellular data. My state-of-the-art satellite phone was a useless brick in my pocket. But right then, in the absolute quiet of the afternoon, I heard a sharp, distinct chime. Preston's burner phone had just received a text message. He quickly glanced at the screen, typed a rapid reply, and shoved the device back into his pocket, his face an unreadable mask of absolute concentration. He had whitelisted his own hidden device through the jamming software. He and Harper were maintaining a secure, invisible line of communication with the outside world, coordinating the final lethal logistics of the offshore transfer, while the rest of us were completely blind and digitally suffocated. The Trojan horse was fully operational, and the gates were locked from the inside. That evening, I retired to my assigned quarters early, claiming exhaustion from the long drive and the venue tour. I locked the heavy wooden door of my suite and waited in the dark, sitting in a velvet armchair by the window. The estate was quiet, the staff having retreated to their off-site lodgings for the night. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, a soft, rhythmic knock sounded at my door. 2 quick taps, a pause, then one more. It was the security protocol knock I had established with Desmond over a decade ago. I silently unlocked the door and let him inside. My head of security moved like a ghost, his massive frame completely silent on the hardwood floor. He did not turn on the lights. He stood in the shadows, his face illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the heavy curtains. "We have a massive problem, sir." Desmond whispered, his voice low and tight with controlled urgency. "I have been monitoring the internal sensor logs from the estate's primary control room. 10 minutes ago, I caught Harper on the service corridor cameras. She was not checking floral arrangements or reviewing catering manifests. She used a decrypted keycard to access the main server room in the basement. She locked the door from the inside and remained in there for exactly 9 minutes. Event planners do not configure servers in the middle of the night, Gregory. She is altering the network architecture." I absorbed the information, feeling the cold, hard reality of their plan solidifying into a concrete shape. Harper was not just an event planner. She was a highly sophisticated digital operative. She had spent those 9 minutes planting the final execution codes into the corrupted wedding software, linking it directly to the biometric override on the encrypted flash drive. The moment Preston kissed my daughter at the altar, the digital proxy protocol would ignite, draining the blind trust completely dry. I looked at Desmond in the dark. His eyes were fierce, waiting for my command. He was ready to breach the basement, drag Harper out by her tailored collar, and dismantle the entire operation by force. But brute force would not give me the absolute victory I required. I needed them to trigger the trap so I could slam the steel door shut on their own necks. I ordered Desmond to return to his post and monitor the cameras without intervening. We were going to let the wedding proceed exactly as they had planned. We were going to let them stand at the altar and believe they had conquered the world. The pain of watching Victoria walk down the aisle toward a predator would be agonizing, but it was the necessary price for her total salvation. I would endure the fake smiles, the poisoned champagne, and the suffocating digital isolation. I slowly sat back down in the heavy velvet chair, crossing my arms and staring out at the silent, dark estate. I was finally ready to end this deadly corporate war forever. I would completely obliterate their arrogant illusions and safely rescue my child. The morning sunlight filtered through the heavy silk drapes of my private suite, casting long, sharp shadows across the antique mahogany furniture. My mind had spent the entire night running through endless tactical permutations, calculating their master plan. The most volatile element of this entire operation was not the flash drive or the corrupted server room. It was my daughter. I needed to know exactly how deep Preston had buried his psychological hooks into Victoria. I needed to precisely gauge the absolute structural integrity of her loyalty before I detonated this fraudulent wedding. I left my suite and navigated the bustling corridors of the estate, moving through a swarm of caterers and florists who were frantically preparing the grounds for the afternoon ceremony. I found Victoria sitting alone on the patio. She was wrapped in a plush white robe, sipping a cup of tea. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, glowing with that rare, fragile anticipation of a bride on her wedding morning. It broke my heart to know I was about to test the very foundation of her happiness. I walked over and took the wrought iron seat across from her. She smiled warmly, reaching out to gently squeeze my hand. Her fingers were trembling slightly with nervous excitement. I offered her a reassuring, paternal smile, pushing down the towering wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. We spoke casually for a few minutes about the weather, the floral arrangements, and the arrival times of our remaining guests. Then I carefully shifted the trajectory of the conversation. I kept my voice light, entirely devoid of accusation, framing my words as nothing more than the natural, lingering anxieties of a protective father giving away his only child. Victoria, sweetheart. I began adopting a thoughtful, slightly hesitant tone. I was reviewing some of the final legal documents last night, just finishing the last few details hidden deep on the family trust provisions. There were a few minor anomalies in Preston's background checks that my legal team flagged. Nothing explicitly alarming, just some gaps in his employment history before he joined our firm and some unusual offshore financial routing that seemed unnecessarily complex for a man of his former salary bracket. Have you two ever discussed his finances prior to his promotion? The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying to witness. The soft, radiant glow vanished from Victoria's face, instantly replaced by a rigid, impenetrable mask of defensive fury. She snatched her hand away from mine as if my touch had suddenly burned her skin. Her eyes, usually so warm and expressive, hardened into sharp, hostile slits. She slammed her teacup down onto the glass patio table with enough force to spill hot liquid over the pristine white tablecloth. "You always do this, Dad," she exploded, her voice echoing sharply across the empty stone terrace. "You never trust anyone. You have spent my entire life interrogating every single person who tries to get close to me. You treat everyone like they are a hostile corporate takeover waiting to happen. Preston is the best thing that has ever happened to me. He has taken care of your health. He has managed this entire wedding flawlessly, and he is the only man who loves me for me, not your money. He does not care about your trust fund or your corporate empire. He cares about my happiness, which is more than I can say for you right now." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The absolute conviction in her voice was chilling. Preston had not merely charmed her. He had systematically isolated her from my influence. He had anticipated my eventual skepticism and preemptively weaponized her against me. He had painted me as the paranoid billionaire who would inevitably try to sabotage her true love. It was a textbook psychological quarantine. If I presented her with my suspicions now, if I told her about the digital Trojan horse, the burner phone, or the poisoned capsules, without absolute irrefutable proof, she would completely reject reality. She would view my warnings as the ultimate manifestation of my toxic paranoia. Preston would play the wounded noble victim. He would calmly suggest that my mind was finally failing, using my faked medical decline as the ultimate proof of my instability. Harper would silently delete the corrupted software, the offshore accounts would vanish, and the two of them would disappear into the wind, taking my daughter's heart with them. I sat there in the morning sun, staring at the fierce, defensive posture of my only child. I realized with absolute horrifying clarity that my daughter was completely brainwashed. She was a hostage who genuinely worshipped her captor. If I stopped this wedding right now, I would save my fortune and my life, but I would lose Victoria forever. She would never forgive me for ruining her perfect day based on what she would perceive as my malicious, unfounded delusions. The wedge between us would become permanent. Preston would still win the psychological war even if he lost the financial battle. I could not simply pull the plug. I had to let the current flow all the way to the end of the circuit. I had to let Preston stand at the altar in front of 200 witnesses and attempt to execute his masterpiece. I had to let him press the detonator so Victoria could witness the explosion with her own eyes. It was the only way to shatter his illusion and break the profound hypnotic hold he had over her mind. I immediately backed down, raising my hands in a gesture of total surrender. I forced an expression of deep paternal regret onto my face. "You are right, Victoria," I said softly, letting my shoulders slump in manufactured defeat. "I am sorry. I am just a foolish old man who is terrified of letting his little girl go. I let my corporate paranoia get the better of me. Preston is a fine man. I am incredibly proud to have him in our family. Please forgive me. Let us not let my anxiety ruin this beautiful morning." Victoria scrutinized my face for a long, tense moment. Slowly, the rigid anger melted away from her posture, replaced by a lingering, exasperated pity. She sighed heavily, reaching across the table to briefly touch my arm. "It is okay, Dad," she murmured, her voice softening. "Just please turn off the CEO brain for today. Just be my father." I nodded, offering a weak, trembling smile. I watched her gather her robe and walk back inside the estate to begin her bridal preparations. As the heavy glass door clicked shut behind her, my expression instantly went completely cold. I slowly pulled out my secure mobile device, staring at the blank screen. My daughter had asked me to turn off the CEO brain. She had absolutely no idea that the CEO brain was the only thing standing between her and a lifetime of sheer devastation. The invisible wall of isolation Preston had built around her was a complete masterpiece, but it was made of fragile glass, and in just a few short hours, I was fully prepared to smash it into a million pieces. To smash that glass without collateral damage, I needed a weapon forged from absolute, undeniable scientific fact. My daughter's blind devotion could not be broken by mere suspicion or circumstantial evidence involving offshore accounts and burner phones. Preston had conditioned her to dismiss my corporate paranoia. I needed a truth so brutal and undeniable that it would instantly sever the psychological chains binding her to him. That truth was not found in a ledger or a server room. It was locked inside the dark amber glass bottles sitting on my kitchen counter. After the terrifying physical glitch in my study, when the evening scotch had prematurely triggered a minor cardiac event, I knew I was dealing with a highly sophisticated biological weapon. But knowing was not enough. I needed a chemical breakdown. I needed the exact molecular blueprint of my intended murder. 2 days after I flushed the original capsules down the drain and replaced them with baking soda, a fresh shipment of the holistic supplements arrived via private courier. Preston personally placed the new bottle on the kitchen island, reminding me with a warm smile that consistency was key to my recovery. I smiled back, thanked him for his diligence, and waited for him to leave for a golf outing. The moment his vehicle cleared the front gates, I took the sealed bottle and locked myself in my study. I poured 2 of the capsules into a sterile plastic vial, sealed it inside a discreet padded envelope, and called Desmond. I told him we needed a deep background check on a proprietary substance, and it had to be done entirely off the books. Desmond did not ask questions. He utilized a contact from his military intelligence days, an independent, heavily guarded black site laboratory located discreetly on the outskirts of Fort Worth. This facility did not handle routine blood work or corporate drug testing. They specialized in identifying untraceable toxins, synthetic narcotics, and exotic chemical agents for clients who required absolute anonymity. I handed the padded envelope to Desmond in the underground parking garage of my corporate headquarters. I instructed him to drive the package to the laboratory himself, pay the expedited processing fee in untraceable cash, and ensure that my name appeared on absolutely no documentation. The wait for the results was an agonizing exercise in psychological endurance. For an entire week, I had to continue playing the role of the declining patriarch. I sat across from Preston at family dinners, listening to him discuss wedding logistics, while he confidently believed a lethal compound was silently building up in my bloodstream. Every time he asked about my health, every time he offered a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, the urge to reach across the table and physically destroy him roared through my veins. But I held my composure. I swallowed my fake capsules, feigned my hand tremors, and waited for the science to validate my fury. Late on a Friday evening, the answers finally arrived via an encrypted self-destructing digital file sent directly to my secure terminal. I opened the toxicology report, the bright glare of the computer screen illuminating the dark expanse of my empty office. The lead toxicologist had written a detailed summary that read like a manual for a perfectly orchestrated assassination. The dark powder inside Preston's holistic capsules was not a vitamin, a mineral, or an experimental longevity supplement. It was a highly refined synthetic cardiovascular inhibitor. The report explained that the chemical was specifically designed as a slow-accumulating binary agent. On its own, the powder was completely inert. It could sit in a human body for months without causing a single adverse reaction. It would simply bind to the cellular walls of the heart and the major arteries remaining dormant and utterly invisible to standard medical blood panels. A conventional doctor running a routine physical would find absolutely nothing wrong with my cardiovascular health. This was why Preston had been so confident in administering it every morning in front of my daughter. He was building the foundation of my grave in broad daylight. However, the true horror of the compound lay in its activation sequence. The toxicologist noted that the dormant chemical was highly volatile when exposed to a very specific set of biological catalysts. If the human body experienced a sudden massive spike in blood acidity, combined with a particular profile of fermented alcohol, the inert powder would undergo an immediate and violent structural change. It would instantly constrict the coronary arteries, triggering a massive catastrophic myocardial infarction. The heart would essentially tear itself apart from the inside out within a matter of minutes. The report concluded with a chillingly clinical assessment, stating that post-mortem pathology would classify the event as natural sudden heart failure. The chemical would dissipate during the infarction, leaving zero trace of foul play. I sat frozen in my leather chair reading the chemical breakdown over and over again. My mind immediately raced back to the terrifying night with the scotch. The heavy liquor had acted as a minor imperfect catalyst. It had been just enough to trigger a severe localized reaction, warning my body before the full lethal dose could accumulate. But Preston had not designed this poison to be triggered by a random evening drink. He had orchestrated a much grander, much more public execution. My eyes darted to the section of the report detailing the specific alcohol and acidity requirements needed to achieve total instantaneous cardiac failure. The numbers perfectly matched a highly specialized profile. The realization slammed into my chest with the force of a freight train. I remembered a meeting with the caterers 3 weeks prior. We were finalizing the beverage menu for the reception. I had suggested a reliable standard champagne for the primary toast. Preston had vehemently objected. He had insisted with absolute unwavering passion that we upgrade the selection to a specific vintage. He claimed Victoria deserved the absolute finest luxury available. He had personally ordered 36 bottles of Paul Roger Vintage 2008. It was a notoriously crisp champagne celebrated for its uniquely sharp acidity and high alcohol content by volume. It was the exact perfect chemical catalyst required to turn the dormant powder in my heart into a lethal weapon. The absolute brilliance of his malice left me completely breathless and paralyzed. He was going to make me willingly pay for the weapon and force my oblivious daughter to watch me drink it. He had meticulously calculated the timeline so that exactly 10 minutes after he slid the wedding ring onto Victoria's finger, the staff would pour the Paul Roger. We would raise our glasses, I would drink to their long, happy life together, and exactly 20 minutes later I would collapse dead on the ballroom floor. They were literally planning my murder in plain sight, perfectly disguised as a luxury celebration of love and family unity. The sheer audacity of the betrayal finally extinguished any lingering shred of mercy left in my soul. I closed the toxicology file and permanently deleted the decryption key from my system. The deadly trap was set, but I alone held the remote control to detonate it. The deadly trap was set, but I alone held the remote control to detonate it. I needed absolute, undeniable leverage. The toxicology report gave me the biological weapon, but I still needed the complete financial and historical blueprint of the executioners. I had to unmask the ghosts. The next morning, 48 hours before Victoria was scheduled to walk down the aisle, I slipped away from the Austin estate under the pretense of a final fitting for my tuxedo in the city. Desmond drove me in a modest, unmarked sedan. We did not go to a tailor. We drove to a vast, abandoned commercial parking lot on the industrial outskirts of the city. A nondescript moving van was parked in the furthest corner, isolated from any potential surveillance. I stepped out of the sedan and climbed into the back of the van. The interior was completely transformed. It was a rolling state-of-the-art command center, humming with the low vibration of heavily encrypted servers and cooling fans. My longtime personal attorney, Mitchell Crawford, was sitting at a metal table looking unusually pale and incredibly tense. Beside him sat two elite digital forensic specialists from a private cyber intelligence firm Desmond had contracted. They were staring at multiple glowing monitors tracking the digital footprints we had captured from the corrupted wedding software and the intercepted signals from the burner phone. Mitchell began speaking, his voice devoid of its usual courtroom confidence. "Gregory," he said quietly, "what we have uncovered over the last 12 hours is far beyond basic corporate espionage. The man currently sleeping in your guest house, the man your daughter plans to marry, does not actually exist. The identity of Preston is a meticulously crafted, fabricated illusion." Mitchell pushed a thick, heavily redacted dossier across the metal table. I opened the file, scanning the genuine background of my future son-in-law. His real name was entirely different. He was not a rising star in the corporate financial sector. He was a highly functional, dangerously reckless gambling addict who had spent the last decade leaving a trail of absolute financial devastation across multiple states. The specialists had traced the offshore routing protocols embedded in Harper's wedding software. The destination accounts were not standard offshore tax havens. They were directly linked to a notoriously ruthless international crime syndicate. Preston had not merely accrued a mild gambling debt. He had borrowed heavily from a deeply violent cartel to fund a massive catastrophic series of high-stakes losses. He currently owed them exactly $15 million. The deadline for that payment had expired 3 months ago. They had given him a final non-negotiable window to produce the funds, or they were going to execute him. Victoria was never a romantic target. She was nothing more than a convenient, heavily guarded bank vault, and he was the desperate rat trying to chew his way inside. The sheer depravity of his motive was staggering, but the cyber specialists were not finished. One of the analysts turned his monitor toward me, pulling up a series of legal documents and old booking photographs. We dug into the event coordinator. The analyst explained, his tone strictly professional. "The woman calling herself Harper is equally fraudulent. Her background as an elite New York event planner is a complete manufactured front. Her real name is Elena, and she is a convicted cyber fraudster. She served 3 years in a federal penitentiary for orchestrating a highly sophisticated wire fraud scheme targeting elderly investors a decade ago. She is an absolute master of social engineering and digital infiltration." But the most horrifying detail was not her criminal record. The analyst brought up a scanned copy of a heavily faded municipal document from a small county in Nevada. It was a marriage certificate dated 7 years ago. The names on the official document belonged to the man calling himself Preston and the woman calling herself Harper. They were not corporate acquaintances. They were legally, bindingly married. The elite event planner and the loving, devoted fiancé were a married team of desperate professional grifters. They had spent years hunting for the perfect vulnerable mark to pay off a massive, fatal debt. They had found Victoria, studied my immense wealth, and constructed a flawlessly synchronized, incredibly lethal operation. I stared at the glowing monitors in the cramped humming van, feeling a cold, dark void open up inside my chest. The entire picture was finally completely illuminated. The $150 million they planned to siphon from my blind trust was not just for luxury. It was a desperate, coordinated ransom payment. They intended to use $15 million to instantly clear the cartel debt, essentially buying back their own lives. The remaining $135 million was their retirement fund. With that staggering amount of untraceable capital, they intended to vanish entirely. They would flee to a non-extradition country, change their identities once again, and live out the rest of their days as wealthy royalty. And to ensure they were never hunted down, they had to permanently silence the only man who possessed the resources, the intellect, and the sheer ruthless willpower to track them across the globe. My murder was a strict operational necessity. By poisoning me with the cardiovascular inhibitor, they were removing the threat to their stolen empire. Victoria would be left a grieving, devastated widow, completely unaware that she had been utterly manipulated by a married pair of sociopathic predators. She would likely defend Preston's memory blind to the fact that he was living on a tropical beach with his actual wife funded by the wealth I had spent a lifetime building. I slowly closed the dossier and handed it back to Mitchell. The silence inside the van was absolute, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans. Mitchell looked at me with an expression of profound concern, waiting for my inevitable explosion of rage. But the rage had completely vanished, replaced by an Arctic, calculating calm. I asked the lead digital specialist to securely transfer every single piece of evidence onto a highly encrypted portable drive. I wanted the fake corporate background files, the Nevada marriage certificate, the cartel financial links, and the criminal history records neatly organized into a singular, undeniable presentation. I needed the documentation to be so overwhelming that even Victoria's heavily manipulated mind would not be able to deny the objective truth. Desmond watched me from the shadows near the doors, understanding exactly what was about to transpire. The wedding was merely hours away. The elaborate floral arrangements were being placed on the tables, the string quartet was tuning their instruments, and the deadly vintage champagne was chilling in the silver buckets. Preston and Harper believed they had successfully navigated the final stretch of their grand illusion. They believed the clueless old man was safely neutralized, peacefully waiting to drink his own execution order. I thanked Mitchell and the cyber team for their diligence. I stepped out of the hidden van and into the bright afternoon sun, clutching the encrypted drive containing their destruction. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their ruin. I stepped out of the hidden van and into the bright afternoon sun, clutching the encrypted drive containing their destruction. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their ruin. The conventional response to uncovering a massive extortion and murder plot would be to call the federal authorities, immediately cancel the opulent wedding, and have Preston and Harper arrested before they could finalize their elegant floral arrangements. That is what a cautious man would do. But I am not a cautious man, and I absolutely refuse to allow them to slip away into the vast labyrinth of the legal system, with their fabricated identities completely intact. I wanted them to step up to the grand altar. I wanted them to experience the intoxicating thrill of absolute victory right before the floor collapsed beneath their treacherous feet. I did not cancel the wedding. Instead, I spent the final 48 hours meticulously constructing a digital and biological guillotine. My first critical objective was securing the $150 million they actively planned to siphon from my life's work. I could not simply lock down the master corporate accounts, as Harper's embedded parasite software would instantly detect the sudden firewall and alert them to the trap. They needed to believe the massive steel vault door was swinging wide open. I returned to my corporate headquarters in Dallas under the cover of night, bringing Mitchell and my cybersecurity team directly into my private suite. We spent the entire night coding a digital phantom. My technicians created a highly sophisticated honeypot server. It was an absolutely flawless, stunningly realistic mirror image replica of my primary corporate financial matrix. It perfectly displayed the exact same routing numbers, complex offshore trust architectures, and staggering financial balances. But the entire server was nothing more than a localized, tightly contained digital sandbox entirely disconnected from the global banking system. To Harper's proprietary wedding software, it would look exactly like an unprotected pipeline straight into my fortune. When she confidently triggered the transfer during the ceremony, the parasite would drain the $150 million, but the funds would only move from one fake folder to another inside my completely isolated server. While the digital team rendered the intricate financial bait, I worked furiously with Mitchell to protect the actual tangible assets of my empire. I sat at my massive mahogany desk, reviewing staggering stacks of emergency legal documentation. With crisp, deliberate strokes of my gold fountain pen, I physically signed the entirety of my vulnerable wealth over to a newly established, completely impenetrable blind trust. This new entity was deeply buried under so many aggressive layers of robust legal protection, strict international banking jurisdictions, and localized biometric access requirements that not even a highly coordinated state intelligence agency could breach it, let alone a pair of desperate grifters. By the time the sun broke over the Dallas skyline on Friday, my real corporate empire was completely invisible, safely locked away inside a fortified legal bunker, leaving only the glittering, hollow honeypot server for Harper and Preston to eagerly attempt to safely steal. The financial trap was fully armed and absolutely ready. However, the brilliant digital safeguard meant absolutely nothing if my heart violently ruptured on the polished hardwood floor of the Austin ballroom. I urgently needed to survive the Pol Roger champagne, the ultimate acidic catalyst for the deadly synthetic poison Preston had been diligently feeding me for a month. I could not simply refuse to drink the ceremonial toast, as that would instantly alert Preston that I knew about his biological weapon. I had to willingly drink the poison, endure the chemical catalyst, and live to watch the look of sheer horror wash over his arrogant face. To achieve this monumental task, I reached out to the only medical professional I truly trusted. I secretly called Dr. Linwood, the loyal physician Preston had so ruthlessly dismissed a month prior. I had Desmond covertly bring him to my private Dallas estate through a secure service entrance late Thursday evening. When I solemnly showed Dr. Linwood the terrifying toxicology report, retrieved from the elite black site laboratory, the healthy color completely drained from his weathered face. He was deeply horrified by the sheer malice of the synthetic cardiovascular inhibitor they had deployed against me. We had exactly 24 hours to engineer a flawless biological defense before I departed for the Austin venue. Dr. Linwood worked tirelessly through the night, frantically consulting with highly trusted independent toxicologists to rapidly synthesize a heavy, highly specialized chemical neutralizing agent. It was a profoundly potent, deeply invasive blocker, specifically designed to completely coat my delicate arterial walls and instantly neutralize the specific synthetic enzymes of the poison before the alcohol and high acidity of the vintage champagne could successfully trigger the fatal crushing vascular constriction. The unprecedented medical procedure carried its own severe, potentially debilitating physical risks, but it was the absolute only way to guarantee I would remain firmly standing when the steel trap finally snapped shut around their necks. Fast forward to Saturday afternoon, exactly 1 hour before I was officially scheduled to step into my formal tailored tuxedo for the grand wedding ceremony. I sat shirtless on the edge of the plush bed in my private suite at the Austin estate. Dr. Linwood stood directly beside me, his lined face drawn with intense, unwavering focus as he carefully prepared the heavy, specialized medical syringe. The thick liquid inside the sterile glass vial was a pale, icy blue. He thoroughly swabbed my bare shoulder with a cold alcohol wipe and looked me directly in the eyes, asking one final time if I was absolutely certain I wanted to willingly risk the profound, agonizing physical strain of the powerful neutralizing agent. I nodded without a single shred of hesitation or fear. I felt the sharp, sudden pinch of the long needle, immediately followed by a thick, intense burning sensation as the dense chemical blocker flooded rapidly into my deep muscle tissue. The powerful neutralizing agent raced violently through my rushing bloodstream, making my ears ring loudly and my vision blur heavily for a few terrifying seconds. A thick, heavy metallic taste rapidly coated the entire back of my throat, making me briefly gag. The physical toll of the intense chemical intervention was immediate and brutally invasive, causing my muscles to involuntarily clench and my breathing to become shallow and highly labored. I gripped the thick sheets of the bed, riding out the overwhelming wave of synthetic nausea. But as my racing heart rate slowly stabilized and the burning sensation gradually faded into a dull, lingering ache, I knew my impenetrable biological armor was fully deployed. I stood up from the bed, my breathing returning to a normal rhythm. I walked to the antique mirror and stared at my reflection. I picked up my tuxedo shirt and began to button it, my hands moving with absolute precision. I abandoned the pathetic tremor I had been performing. I tied my bow tie and slipped into the jacket. The helpless patriarch was gone. I was the apex predator they had foolishly underestimated. The honeymoon was over before it ever began. I stepped out of my private suite and walked slowly toward the grand foyer, every single step echoing with the heavy weight of impending absolute destruction. The profound lingering ache in my shoulder from Dr. Linwood's massive chemical injection served as a constant rhythmic reminder of my biological armor. I could feel the thick neutralizing agent coating my veins, a cold, heavy shield pulsing directly beneath my skin. As I approached the massive mahogany double doors leading into the main courtyard, the dull roar of 300 affluent guests filtered through the thick wood. These were the elite power brokers of Texas, a carefully curated audience of senators, oil barons, and corporate titans. They had gathered to witness the majestic union of two powerful dynasties. They had absolutely no idea they were actually attending a meticulously planned assassination. The heavy doors swung open, pulled back by two impeccably dressed ushers, and the glorious afternoon sunlight instantly washed over me. The lush, sprawling courtyard had been completely transformed into a breathtaking cathedral of white roses and draped silk. The traditional wedding march began to play from the string quartet, positioned perfectly on the manicured lawn. The music was soaring elegant and completely devoid of the dark, sinister reality pulsing just beneath the surface. I stood at the very top of the marble staircase looking out over the sea of expensive suits and designer gowns. The guests rose collectively to their feet, their faces turning toward the back of the aisle with polite, admiring smiles. I took a deep, measured breath, allowing my shoulders to slump slightly, letting my left hand develop a pronounced, highly visible tremor. I was no longer the apex predator in their eyes. I was the frail, dying patriarch, bravely pushing through his final days to give his beloved daughter away. Victoria appeared beside me, stepping out from the bridal staging room, like a vision of absolute, untouchable purity. She wore a stunning, custom-designed ivory gown that caught the sunlight in a dazzling display of woven crystal and silk. Her face was radiant, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a look of complete, ultimate surrender to a beautiful lie. My heart physically ached as she gently looped her arm through mine. I could feel the delicate warmth of her skin through the dark fabric of my tuxedo. She looked up at me, her expression instantly softening with that deeply manipulated, tragic concern for my failing health. She squeezed my arm silently, asking if I was strong enough to make the long walk. I offered her a weak, immensely affectionate smile, nodding slowly, as if gathering the very last reserves of my fading strength. "You look absolutely beautiful, my darling," I whispered, ensuring my voice carried the perfect, raspy tremor of a man standing on the edge of the grave. We began our slow, highly measured descent down the wide marble stairs. With every single step, I leaned slightly heavier on her arm, forcing her to support a fraction of my weight. I played the dead man walking to absolute perfection. The wealthy guests watched us with profound, silent reverence. I could see the pity etched deeply into the faces of my oldest corporate rivals and closest board members. They saw a giant of industry tragically reduced to a shaking, fragile shell, taking his final brave steps in the sun. They were witnessing the emotional climax of a beautiful family legacy. They did not know they were simply extras in a lavish, deeply psychotic theatrical production staged by a desperate gambling addict. As we navigated the long, white carpet of the center aisle, my sharp, predatory gaze swept the entire perimeter of the sprawling courtyard. I was not looking at the weeping guests or the cascading floral arrangements. I was scanning for the executioners. I found Harper standing perfectly still in the deep, cool shadows beneath a massive ancient oak tree near the front row. She was dressed in an elegant, understated charcoal dress blending flawlessly into the background, like a dedicated, invisible servant of the event. But I knew exactly who she was. I knew her real name was Elena. I knew she was a convicted cyber fraudster, and I knew she was the legal wife of the man standing at the altar. In her perfectly manicured hands, she held a sleek silver iPad. To the oblivious guests, she was simply reviewing the digital seating chart or checking the catering schedule. But I knew the absolute truth. That tablet was directly connected to the corrupted wedding software. Her finger was hovering mere inches above the digital trigger. She was patiently waiting for the officiant to sign the electronic registry. She was waiting to insert the encrypted flash drive and siphon $150 million into the hands of a violent international cartel. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She offered me a crisp, professional nod of encouragement, playing the supportive coordinator right down to the final second. I nodded back, my hand violently shaking against Victoria's arm. Harper thought she was looking at a decaying target. She did not realize I had already cloned the entire corporate mainframe and trapped her digital parasite inside an empty, inescapable void. We finally reached the end of the long aisle, stopping at the base of the elevated floral altar. Preston was waiting for us there, standing tall and devastatingly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo. He looked like the absolute epitome of a loving, devoted partner. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on Victoria, shining with a highly manufactured, Oscar-winning display of overwhelming adoration. As we stepped up to the altar, he immediately stepped forward to meet us. He did not simply take Victoria's hand. He reached out and placed his warm, firm hands over mine, looking deep into my eyes with an expression of profound, fabricated gratitude. "You made it." "Gregory," he whispered, his voice thick with calculated emotion, perfectly pitched so the front row of guests could hear his touching concern. "I know how much strength this took. I promise you I will take care of her for the rest of my life." The sheer, unadulterated sociopathy of his performance was genuinely breathtaking. He was looking directly into the eyes of a man he actively planned to murder in less than 30 minutes, thanking me for delivering my daughter and my fortune directly into his bloody hands. I looked back at him, forcing tears of paternal joy to well up in my eyes. I gently placed Victoria's trembling hand into his. "I trust you, Preston," I replied, my voice breaking with a masterfully executed pathetic frailty. "I trust you with everything I have built." I took a slow, labored step backward, taking my designated seat in the front pew. The beautiful string music slowly faded away into a heavy, total silence. The officiant began to speak, his clear voice echoing widely across the utterly captivated audience sitting in the bright sun. The massive trap was now fully primed. The actors were perfectly positioned, and the very final glorious countdown to their absolute irreversible destruction had officially begun. The massive trap was now fully primed. The actors were perfectly positioned, and the very final glorious countdown to their absolute irreversible destruction had officially begun. The officiant, a distinguished man with a deep, resonant voice, began the traditional welcoming remarks. He spoke eloquently about love, devotion, and the sacred bond of marriage. The afternoon sun beat down on the courtyard, casting a golden hue over the gathered elite of Texas society. I sat perfectly still in the front pew, my breathing slow and completely controlled, ignoring the heavy, dull ache radiating from my shoulder where the neutralizing agent pulsed through my veins. Every single sense was heightened to an extreme, hyper-vigilant state. I could hear the gentle rustle of silk from the bridesmaids' gowns. I could hear the soft, rhythmic clicking of camera shutters from the hired photographers. And out of the corner of my right eye, I could see Harper. She had taken a subtle step forward from the shadow of the oak tree. Her eyes were locked onto the altar, and her thumb was resting softly against the glowing screen of her sleek silver tablet, waiting for the precise moment the digital registry would be electronically filed. Preston stood before the officiant, his posture impeccably straight, completely radiating the confident aura of a man who believed he had just successfully conquered an empire. He looked down at Victoria with a smile so perfectly crafted, so deeply convincing, that under any other circumstances I would have been proud to call him my son. Victoria looked back at him with absolute blind adoration. She was completely captivated by the grand illusion, utterly unaware that the man holding her hands was actively calculating the exact minute of her father's agonizing death. The officiant finished his opening blessing, and paused, taking a slow, deep breath as he prepared to transition into the binding vows. According to the traditional structure of the ceremony, which Preston had ironically insisted we follow to the letter to maintain an air of classic elegance, there was one specific ancient question that had to be asked. It is a question usually treated as a mere formality, a hollow relic of the past that no one ever actually answers. The officiant looked out over the vast, silent crowd of 300 affluent guests. His voice carried clearly across the manicured lawn. If anyone here can show just cause why these two may not lawfully be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence that followed was intended to last only 3 seconds. It was meant to be a fleeting pause before the exchange of rings. But I did not let the silence pass. I stood up from the heavy wooden pew. I did not struggle. I did not let my hands shake. I completely discarded the pathetic, fragile persona I had been wearing for a month. I straightened my spine to its full commanding height, squaring my shoulders and stepping directly onto the elevated floral altar. Victoria turned her head toward me, a look of profound confusion flashing across her beautiful features. "Dad," she whispered softly, her brow furrowing in alarm. "What are you doing?" I did not answer her immediately. I stepped forward and slowly let go of Victoria's hand, stepping between her and the man she believed she loved. I reached out and firmly grabbed the microphone from the wooden podium, pulling it directly from the startled officiant's grip. I turned around, facing the sea of incredibly powerful, wealthy guests, and then I slowly turned my head to lock eyes with Preston. The confident, victorious smile on his handsome face instantly fractured, replaced by a sudden, rigid flash of pure, unadulterated panic. He recognized the shift in my posture. He saw the cold, lethal clarity in my eyes. He knew in that terrifying fraction of a second that the clueless old man was entirely dead and gone. "I object," I said, my voice echoing like a thunderclap through the absolute suffocating silence of the grand courtyard. It was not a weak, trembling whisper. It was the deep, authoritative, uncompromising voice of a chief executive officer delivering a fatal verdict. A collective gasp rippled through the 300 guests. I heard the sudden sharp scraping of chairs and the confused murmurs of corporate titans and senators. Victoria physically recoiled, her hands flying to her mouth. "Dad, stop it," she pleaded, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "You are ruining everything. Please just sit down." I kept my eyes entirely locked on Preston, watching the blood rapidly drain from his face. "I cannot sit down, Victoria," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and utterly merciless. "Because the state of Texas does not recognize bigamy, and my daughter cannot lawfully marry a man who is still legally bound to his event coordinator." The courtyard erupted into a wave of shocked, chaotic whispers. Victoria froze, her eyes darting frantically between me and Preston. Preston took a step back, raising his hands in a desperate, defensive gesture. "Gregory, this is madness," he stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "You are having a medical episode. Your mind is failing. Someone call Dr. Arrington immediately. He needs his medication. Do not call for the fake, holistic doctor you hired to murder me." I commanded, my voice booming through the speakers and cutting through his pathetic lie like a scythe. I turned my gaze toward the shadow of the oak tree. "And do not look at Harper for a digital rescue. Her real name is Elena. She is a convicted cyber fraudster who served 3 years in a federal penitentiary. And more importantly, she is your legal wife." I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out the encrypted flash drive I had obtained from the black site moving van. I held it up in the bright afternoon sun for the entire crowd to see. "I do not have a failing mind, Preston. I have a deeply meticulous investigative team. I have the municipal marriage certificate from Nevada, dated 7 years ago, bearing both of your real names. I have the complete offshore financial routing protocols she just attempted to execute on her sleek silver tablet. And I have the fully detailed, incredibly precise toxicology report, breaking down the highly volatile synthetic cardiovascular inhibitor you have been feeding me every single morning for the last month." Victoria let out a sharp, devastated sob, stumbling backward until her shoulders hit the wooden floral arch. She looked at Preston, her eyes begging him to deny the horrifying allegations, begging him to tell her it was all a paranoid delusion. But Preston could not speak. His jaw was clenched, his breathing shallow and erratic. He looked frantically toward the shadows, seeking out his partner in crime. Harper was no longer standing with her tablet. She had dropped the device onto the grass and was actively sprinting toward the heavy iron gates at the perimeter of the estate. She had realized the trap was sprung and was abandoning him to save herself. But Desmond was already there. Two massive, heavily armed security contractors stepped out from behind the stone pillars, instantly intercepting her and pinning her arms behind her back. "They were not planning a wedding, Victoria," I said softly, turning to look at my shattered, weeping daughter. "They were planning a highly synchronized, profoundly ruthless execution. He is a reckless, desperate gambling addict who owes $15 million to an international cartel. The money he intended to steal from our blind trust was an absolute non-negotiable ransom payment for his own life. The remainder was their untraceable retirement fund. The software integration, the isolated venue, the digital signal jammers, it was all a meticulously designed heist. And the vintage Paul Rogers champagne waiting in those silver buckets was the highly acidic chemical catalyst designed to trigger the dormant poison in my heart, ensuring I died instantly during the reception toast, leaving you a wealthy, easily manipulated widow." Preston finally snapped. The polished, sophisticated facade completely evaporated, leaving only a cornered, desperate animal. "You arrogant, miserable old fool," he spat, his voice shaking with pure, venomous hatred. "You think you have won, you think you are so brilliant." The transfer protocol was fully automated. The moment the ceremony began, Elena triggered the bypass. "Your blind trust is already completely empty. The offshore accounts are fully funded. Even if you lock me up, your precious corporate empire is entirely bankrupted. You have absolutely nothing left." I looked at him with an expression of profound, devastating pity. I slowly lowered the microphone and smiled a cold, terrifying smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "You truly believe you are the smartest predator in the room, Preston?" I replied quietly, ensuring only he and Victoria could hear my final, crushing revelation. "You never possessed the keys to my empire. The moment you demanded administrative access to my servers, I built a flawless, completely isolated digital honeypot. Your brilliant wife did not hack my blind trust. She hacked an empty, heavily monitored sandbox. Every single dollar you attempted to steal was automatically routed into a secure holding account, fully controlled by federal investigators. I physically transferred my entire fortune to an impenetrable, biometrically secured offshore entity 72 hours ago. The wealth you tried to steal is completely safe. The poison you tried to trigger has been entirely neutralized by a heavy chemical blocker injected into my shoulder 1 hour ago. You have stolen absolutely nothing, you have murdered absolutely no one, and you are completely irrevocably out of time." Preston's knees buckled. The absolute crushing weight of his total failure hit him with the force of a physical blow. He collapsed onto the pristine white carpet of the altar, his hands covering his face as the distant rising wail of approaching police sirens began to echo loudly through the Texas hills. The trap had perfectly closed, the ghosts had been permanently unmasked, and my daughter was finally safely, completely free. But the sheer intoxicating delusion of a desperate addict does not simply evaporate into the thin air, even when faced with absolute, undeniable ruin. Preston suddenly lifted his head from his trembling hands, his dark eyes wide and completely unhinged. The crushing realization of his failure mutated instantly into a violent, chaotic wave of absolute denial. He scrambled up from the pristine white carpet of the altar, his tailored tuxedo jacket now severely wrinkled and disheveled. Chaos erupts across the sprawling courtyard in a fresh, terrifying wave. The wealthy guests, previously frozen in stunned silence, began to shout and murmur in genuine panic. Several corporate titans stood up quickly, pulling their wives safely back from the center aisle. Victoria freezes completely, her delicate hands still trembling near her mouth, her mind desperately struggling to process the rapid, violent unraveling of her entire future. The charming mask of Preston shatters into a million jagged pieces. He turned wildly toward the perimeter of the sprawling estate, where my private security contractors had pinned his fraudulent wife against the solid stone pillars. He desperately screams at Harper to initiate the transfer, his voice a raw, guttural roar echoing over the approaching sirens. He commanded her with a frantic, breathless urgency, demanding she execute the final phase of their digital heist, despite the surrounding disaster. Harper, driven by the exact same cornered desperation, twisted violently against the firm grip of the massive security guards. With a sudden, savage thrash of her lithe body, she managed to wrench her right arm free, just long enough to lunge toward the manicured grass, where her sleek silver tablet had previously fallen. Her manicured fingers frantically grazed the glowing glass screen. Harper hits the button on her tablet with a triumphant, breathless gasp, genuinely believing she had just successfully deployed her malicious parasite directly into my master corporate mainframe. She looked up from the lawn, a feral, victorious smile briefly flashing across her pale face, fully expecting the immediate digital confirmation of a $150 million international wire transfer. She believed she had secured their ultimate salvation. I stood tall on the elevated floral altar, holding the heavy microphone firmly in my right hand. I did not flinch. I did not move to stop her frantic movements. Instead, I let out a deep, resonant sound. I laughed into the microphone. It was a cold, humorless sound that cut through the rising panic of the courtyard like a sharpened steel blade. The sound echoed widely through the professional audio system, forcing the murmuring crowd into a sudden, highly uncomfortable silence. I looked directly down at the pathetic man kneeling on the grass. "Go ahead, Harper," I say, my voice dripping with absolute, unwavering authority. "Take the 150 million. For an agonizingly long second, the warm Texas air hung heavy and completely still. Preston turned back to me, his chest heaving under his ruined tuxedo, his desperate eyes searching my face for a massive bluff. He wanted to truly believe I was simply a defeated old man making a final pathetic attempt to save face. But there was absolutely no bluff to be found in my steady gaze. Suddenly, alarms blare from the device of Harper on the grass. It was not a subtle chime. It was a loud, piercing, highly aggressive digital siren that completely shattered the quiet tension of the afternoon. The screen of her tablet flashed a brilliant, violent crimson red, projecting a massive federal error code that completely defied their extensive criminal preparation. The digital parasite had not breached a vulnerable, unsecured banking portal as they had originally intended. It had blindly charged directly into a heavily fortified, highly monitored federal intelligence trap. Harper stared at the flashing red screen in absolute horror, the feral smile instantly sliding off her face as the security guards quickly secured her arm once again, pulling her roughly back away from the device. The honeypot server had performed its duty flawlessly, absorbing the malicious attack and instantly neutralizing their grand financial scheme. Preston watched the flashing red light reflecting off the nearby marble steps, his mind finally completely breaking under the undeniable weight of reality. He let out a low, pathetic whimper, stumbling backward until he hit the edge of the wooden podium. I reached back into the inner pocket of my tailored tuxedo jacket. I pull out the toxicology report, the thick, undeniable stack of physical papers detailing the precise molecular structure of the deadly cardiovascular inhibitor they had methodically slipped into my morning supplements for an entire month. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and throw it at the chest of Preston. The heavy papers slapped against his pristine white shirt. They scattered wildly across the floral altar and fluttered down to the marble floor like dead, useless leaves. "The transfer you just triggered did not go to the Caymans." "Preston," I say, my voice projecting with lethal clarity through the professional speakers, ensuring every single prominent guest in the sprawling courtyard heard his ultimate, unavoidable condemnation. "It went straight to the FBI, attaching your exact GPS coordinates and locking down the entirety of your violent cartel syndicate network." Preston stared down at the scattered toxicology reports, his breath hitching in his throat as the heavy realization washed over his fractured mind. He had not simply failed to rob my corporate empire. He had actively handed the federal government the ultimate undeniable roadmap to his own permanent destruction, alongside the complete digital footprint of the criminal organization that wanted him dead. He was entirely ruined, caught hopelessly between a federal prison cell and the ruthless vengeance of a deeply violent cartel. I paused for a long, heavy moment, allowing the absolute totality of his doom to settle heavily onto his shaking shoulders. I slowly turned my gaze toward the elegant silver buckets resting quietly near the edge of the altar. The deadly vintage champagne was still chilling silently on ice. I looked back at his terrified face. And by the way, I add my tone dropping to a deadly, deeply conversational whisper that carried a profound, undeniable finality. I prefer bourbon over your poisoned champagne. The wail of the police sirens, which had previously been a distant echo, suddenly amplified into a deafening roar as a dozen marked federal vehicles violently breached the front iron gates of the massive estate. Red and blue lights flashed wildly against the ancient oak trees, painting the terrified faces of the wedding guests in a chaotic rotating spectrum of brilliant colors. Heavily armed federal agents poured out of the vehicles, moving with rapid tactical precision across the manicured lawn. They completely bypassed the stunned crowd marching directly toward the altar. Two stern agents grabbed Preston by his arms, violently jerking him upright and snapping heavy steel cuffs securely around his wrists. He did not fight them. He simply hung his head, a completely broken, defeated shell of a man. Across the courtyard, more agents took custody of Harper, marching her away toward a waiting transport van. The grand, lethal illusion was over. I placed the heavy microphone onto the wooden podium, walking away from them forever. But walking away was a momentary luxury I could not yet afford. The heavy thud of my polished shoes against the marble steps was instantly swallowed by the absolute deafening explosion of sheer chaos behind me. I stopped at the base of the altar and slowly turned around, watching the final violent act of this tragedy unfold. The heavy oak doors of the venue had not just been opened, they had been violently thrown wide by the sheer force of the federal raid. Dozens of highly trained agents, their tactical gear a stark contrast to the delicate white roses and draped silk, completely swarmed the elevated platform. Mitchell was walking purposefully through the center of the frantic courtyard, clutching a thick leather briefcase containing the undeniable legal warrants. He pointed directly toward the altar, coordinating the strike team with the calm, ruthless efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor. The wealthy, powerful guests of Texas elite were scrambling frantically out of the way, knocking over crystal champagne flutes and silver trays in their desperate haste to escape the tactical perimeter. The perfect, opulent wedding reception had been entirely reduced to a chaotic, swirling crime scene in a matter of seconds. Preston, realizing the absolute totality of his doom, suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. The distracted federal agents momentarily lost their grip. With a sudden, explosive burst of pure, cornered adrenaline, Preston violently wrenched his right shoulder backward. He ignored the barricaded main gates. Instead, he bolted wildly toward the narrow stone pathway leading into the dense, manicured gardens at the rear of the sprawling estate. His tuxedo jacket ripped loudly as he sprinted across the pristine white carpet. He looked like a terrified animal, completely stripped of his sophisticated charm and arrogant confidence. But he had fundamentally miscalculated the meticulous preparation of my security team. Desmond had not simply been watching from the shadows. He had anticipated the flight response. Before Preston could even reach the edge of the garden pathway, Desmond moved with terrifying, lethal speed. He intercepted the fleeing groom with a brutal, uncompromising tackle. The heavy, visceral impact of Desmond crashing into Preston echoed loudly across the courtyard. They went tumbling violently into an intricate display of imported orchids, shattering the expensive ceramic vases into 1,000 jagged pieces. Desmond swiftly pinned Preston face down against the damp earth, driving his heavy knee directly into the spine of the shattered groom. Preston thrashed wildly, screaming desperate, incoherent obscenities into the ruined flowers, but he was completely immobilized. The charming fiancée was utterly gone, replaced by a pathetic criminal who had finally run out of borrowed time. Across the shattered altar, the scene with Harper was equally devastating. She was no longer the composed, invisible event coordinator, blending seamlessly into the elegant background. She fought the federal agents with the feral desperation of a cornered predator. As steel handcuffs ratcheted around her wrists, she began screaming in absolute panic. Her voice was shrill and piercing, stripping away every single layer of her manufactured corporate identity. She shrieked at the agents, demanding a lawyer, threatening absurd legal actions, and wildly cursing Preston for his monumental failure. Her charcoal dress was torn, and stained, her hair falling wildly across her frantic face. Mitchell walked calmly up to her, holding the printed federal indictment. He read her real name aloud, ensuring the entire courtyard heard the undeniable confirmation of her criminal history. She spat violently in his direction, a final display of venom. The agents firmly secured her arms and marched her roughly down the center aisle, parading her past the horrified corporate titans she had sought to steal from. Her screaming gradually faded as they forced her into the back of a heavily armored transport van, slamming the heavy steel doors shut on her fraudulent existence. Amidst the swirling, violent chaos of the federal raid, my eyes found the only person who truly mattered. Victoria was standing completely frozen near the center of the ruined altar. Sunlight caught the woven crystals of her ivory gown, but the radiant purity was completely gone. Her face was terrifyingly pale, completely drained of life. Her wide, unblinking eyes tracked the brutal, muddy arrest of the man she had promised to love forever. She watched Desmond drag Preston from the shattered orchids, his face bruised and covered in dirt, his wrists bound tightly. She watched him being led away, realizing in real time that every single kiss, every gentle touch, and every whispered promise of a beautiful future had been a calculated sociopathic lie. The psychological shock was absolute and completely overwhelming. The illusion fractured her reality so violently that her body could not bear the crushing weight. Her knees buckled beneath the heavy silk of her wedding dress. She let out a single gasp, a sound of devastating heartbreak that pierced through the dull ache of the chemical blocker pulsing in my veins. Victoria collapsed onto the white carpet, her delicate hands clutching her chest as if trying to hold her shattered heart together. I moved instantly, sprinting across the distance between the wooden pews and the floral altar. I dropped heavily to my knees onto the ruined carpet, completely ignoring the sharp pain radiating from my injected shoulder. I wrapped my arms securely around my shaking daughter, pulling her fragile, trembling body tightly against my chest. She buried her face into the fabric of my tailored tuxedo, completely breaking down into raw, uncontrollable sobs. Her tears rapidly soaked through my shirt, burning against my skin. She gripped my shoulders with desperate, white-knuckled strength, anchoring herself to the only real, solid truth left in her completely devastated world. I held her as tightly as humanly possible, resting my chin against the soft crown of her head, gently rocking her back and forth amidst the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles. It was incredibly, profoundly agonizing to watch her beautiful heart break into a million irreparable pieces. I had spent my entire life building an empire specifically to protect her from the harsh, cruel realities of the world. And yet I had been the one to deliver the most devastating blow she had ever experienced. But as I held my weeping daughter on the floor of her ruined wedding, I knew with absolute, uncompromising certainty that my brutal actions were entirely justified. I had not destroyed her life. I had saved it. Preston and Harper were a deadly, creeping infection that had deeply infiltrated the very core of our family. They were silently poisoning the host, preparing to consume everything we held dear. You cannot negotiate with a lethal parasite. You cannot gently reason with a terminal disease. You have to take a sharp, merciless blade and completely cut off of the infected limb before the rot reaches the heart. The surgical amputation was bloody, terrifying, and immensely painful, but it was the absolute only way to ensure the patient would survive. I gently kissed the top of Victoria's head, whispering quiet promises that she was safe, that I was there, and that no one would ever hurt her again. She was finally free, and we would rebuild our lives together. 6 months have passed since that terrifying afternoon in Austin. The changing of the seasons brought a much-needed quiet to our lives, sweeping away the ashes of the ruined wedding and replacing the crushing chaos with absolute, undeniable clarity. I am sitting across from Victoria at the massive mahogany table in my primary corporate boardroom. The expansive glass windows offer a sweeping view of the Dallas skyline, a kingdom that remains entirely secure under my command. The radiant, painfully naive girl who wept violently in her ruined ivory gown no longer exists. She has been completely replaced by a sharp, highly vigilant executive. Her long, flowing hair has been cut into a sleek, professional style. She wears a tailored dark suit, her posture impeccable, her eyes scanning complex quarterly financial reports with a predatory focus that fills me with an immense, unshakable pride. The devastating trauma of the betrayal did not break her spirit. It forged her into unbreakable steel. She learned the hardest lesson of our world in the most brutal manner possible. But she emerged from the fire with her eyes wide open, ready to inherit the empire. She no longer accepts simple answers, and she questions every single motive with a brilliant, calculating skepticism. It is a necessary evolution, a powerful shield that will ensure she never falls victim to another manipulative parasite. Preston, meanwhile, is experiencing a vastly different reality. The glamorous illusion he meticulously crafted has completely evaporated, leaving him to face the dark, inescapable consequences of his boundless greed. He is currently rotting inside a maximum security federal prison, serving a lengthy sentence for wire fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. But the federal walls do not offer him any true sanctuary. He lives every single day in a state of absolute suffocating terror because the international cartel he failed to pay knows exactly where he is. The digital trap I set not only secured my wealth, but it also exposed their entire financial routing network to the authorities, costing them millions. Preston is a marked man, constantly looking over his shoulder in the exercise yard, jumping at every shadow, and waking up in cold sweats. His fraudulent wife, Elena, is housed in a separate federal facility, entirely cut off from the elaborate cons she used to manipulate innocent lives. They gambled their freedom on my execution, and they lost absolutely everything, the physical toll of the heavy chemical blocker. Dr. Linwood injected into my shoulder slowly faded over the following weeks. The terrifying synthetic poison Preston fed me is completely gone from my system, leaving my cardiovascular health stronger than ever. The board of directors who briefly viewed me as a fragile, dying patriarch on that white carpet now look at me with a profound, terrifying respect. They witnessed firsthand the absolute, uncompromising ruthlessness I am capable of when my family and my legacy are actively threatened. There are no more hushed whispers about my impending succession or my declining health. The apex predator never left the building. I am fully restored, leading my enterprise with an iron grip that no one dares to challenge. I look across the polished boardroom table and slide a fresh, highly confidential acquisition file toward Victoria. She picks up her gold pen, reviewing the complex data with analytical precision. We do not speak about Preston or the ruined wedding anymore. That dark chapter has been permanently closed, filed away as a brutal, necessary educational experience. We focus entirely on the future, on expanding the massive, impenetrable fortress we have built together. The deadly trap that was set for me ultimately became the exact mechanism that secured our absolute sovereignty. I survived the poison, dismantled the elaborate illusion, and protected the only person who truly matters to me. I remain firmly seated on my throne, completely unbroken, watching my daughter prepare to conquer the world. Money can buy custom tuxedos and fund perfect smiles, but it can never truly mask a rotten core. You must never let the comforting illusion of family blind your natural instincts. If your gut tells you something is wrong, trust it, verify it, and act without mercy. Forgiveness is a luxury reserved for those who make honest mistakes, not for those who meticulously plan your destruction. It is far better to shatter the heart of someone you love with the ugly truth today than to let them be buried by a beautiful lie tomorrow. Protect your blood and your mind. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to keep their eyes wide open. Drop a comment below. Have you ever caught a traitor hiding in plain sight? Stay sharp, trust your gut, and see you next time.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always care. Father's endless love.